It was a freezing December night in Manchester, England, outside Royal Infirmary Hospital. Christmas lights glowed across the city. Families were shopping. Restaurants were full. Laughter echoed in the streets. But inside room 312, there was only silence. 84-year-old George Harrison lay in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes resting gently beneath his nose. His body was weak, his breathing uneven. A small plastic bag with his belongings sat beside him. One sweater, an old wallet, and a folded photograph. No family, no visitors. Bulaga. The nurses whispered that he had been admitted 2 weeks ago after collapsing in his flat. Neighbors barely knew his name. Social services had no listed relatives. He was alone. Except for one person. Across town, 31-year-old Daniel Reed was closing his small auto repair shop. The garage heater barely worked. Bills were stacked on his desk. His boots were worn thin. Daniel wasn't wealthy. He wasn't important.
This old
He was just a
triumph
mechanic
is
trying
seen
to
a
survive.
lot. Your
3 weeks
grandfather
earlier,
and I
he had met
fixed her
George
up
by
right here.
accident.
It's
Like
beautiful,
so. George
George.
had
You
walked
must
into
have
the
some
garage
great
carrying
stories.
an old, rusted motorcycle helmet. He said nothing at first. Just stared at a classic Triumph parked inside. "You don't see many of those anymore," George had whispered. Daniel smiled. Not many people
बाबा देख
appreciate
जो
that.
इन्हें तेरी क्या
They talked for
हालात
nearly
बना
an
दी.
hour that day.
हाँ
About
बेटा बस
engines, about the
इंतजार है. तुम
1970s,
जल्दी
about
ठीक
riding
हो
free on
जाओगे.
empty roads.
शुक्रिया बेटा.
George never mentioned family, but he did mention something else. Once I belonged to a brotherhood, he had said quietly. We rode together, lived together, protected each other. Daniel didn't press,
Daniel,
but he
we
saw
need
something
to
in the
talk
old
about your
man's
test
eyes,
results.
pride mixed with
Is
regret.
it bad?
When Daniel heard
It's
through a local
serious. We
notice that
need to
George had
start
been
treatment
hospitalized, something didn't
immediately.
feel right. So after work, he went to visit. The first time he walked into room 312, George's
आश में जो ना खेलता तो आज उस पर ना होता तय इमरान.
Of course I did, Daniel said, pulling up a chair. He brought tea in a thermos. Sat for hours listening to stories about open highways, roaring engines, and loyalty that felt unbreakable. But as days passed, George grew weaker. One evening, a doctor gently pulled Daniel aside. He doesn't have much time. If there's anyone he'd like to see, now is the time. Daniel returned to the room and found George staring at the folded photograph on his bedside table. "Open it," George whispered. Inside was an old picture, about 40 bikers standing proudly beside their motorcycles. Leather jackets, fierce expressions, Brotherhood. On the back were the words, Hells Angels 1976, Manchester chapter. Forever brothers, Daniel swallowed hard. The Hells Angels. Fear, judge, misunderstood. But George's voice trembled when he said, "They were my family once. Do they know you're here?" Daniel asked softly. George didn't answer. Tears slipped quietly down his cheeks. That night, Daniel went home and didn't sleep. He searched online, made calls, sent messages to motorcycle clubs in the region. Most ignored him. Until finally, just before midnight, a gruff voice answered. "This is the Manchester chapter. Who's asking?" Daniel took a breath. "Oh, there's a man named George Harrison in Royal Infirmary. He says he rode with you in '76. He's dying. And he's alone." Silence. Then the voice changed. "Stay with him. We'll handle the rest." The next afternoon, hospital staff heard something unusual. A low rumble in the distance. It grew louder and louder. Patients moved toward windows. Nurses froze mid-step. Outside the hospital, more than 150 motorcycles slowly filled the parking area. Engines shut off one by one. Leather jackets bore the unmistakable red and white emblem. The Hells Angels had
इमरान
arrived.
हो
Not
तो
shouting, not causing chaos,
अब
but walking
जोनाथन
calmly
नहीं
and
खिलेगी.
respectfully into the hospital hall. Security didn't stop them. No one dared. They gathered outside room 312. A tall, older biker with silver hair stepped inside first. He removed his gloves, looked at George, and his voice broke. Brother, we thought we lost you. George's eyes
Brother,
slowly
we're
opened.
here.
For a second, confusion, then recognition. His lips trembled. You came back. One by one, bikers stepped forward. Some placed their hands on his shoulder. Some wiped tears openly. These were men the world called dangerous. But in that room, they were just brothers saying goodbye. Daniel stood quietly in the corner, overwhelmed. George motioned him closer. This young man, he whispered weakly, didn't forget me. The silver-haired biker turned to Daniel. Oh, you made the call? Daniel nodded. The biker placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you understand what loyalty means. That evening, surrounded by engines, leather, memories,
इमरान
and
भाई
love,
उठो
George
प्लीज
Harrison
उठो
took his final
और
breath.
जुआ खोलो
Peacefully,
पसे में
not
दे
alone.
दूंगा.
3 days later, Manchester witnessed something unforgettable. Over 200 motorcycles escorted George's coffin through the city. Traffic stopped. Pedestrians removed their hats. Some cried without knowing why. At the front of the procession stood Daniel, the poor mechanic who refused to look away. Away. At the cemetery, the silver-haired biker handed Daniel George's old riding gloves. He wanted you to have these. Daniel's hands shook as he accepted them. He didn't join the club. He didn't need to. Because that day he learned something deeper than fear, reputation, or leather patches. Sometimes the world abandons the elderly. Sometimes society forgets the quiet ones. But it only takes one human being, one mechanic, one phone call, to remind 200 brothers what loyalty really means. And in a hospital room filled with machines and silence, kindness roared louder than any engine ever could.